podcast right now.
Lloraba que daba pena por amor a Magdalena y ella me abandonó distribuyendo en el jardín una linda flor. Y ella me abandonó distribuyendo en el jardín una linda flor. Ella que para mí fue la única ilusión, dejó en mi vida pesares. Yo era feliz, ahora sé que es dolor porque perdí a mi gran amor. Llorar como lloré,
DJ El Chino.
nadie debe llorar. Amar, amar, amar como yo amé. Nadie debe de amar. Lloraba que daba pena por amor a Magdalena. Y ella me abandonó distribuyendo en el jardín una linda flor. Y ella me abandonó distribuyendo en el jardín una linda flor. Vaya, echa para allá, pa' que bailen, pa' que sientas mi pena. ¡Hey!
Yo lloré, yo lloré, yo lloré, yo lloré por amor a Magdalena. Yo lloré, yo lloré, yo lloré, yo lloré por amor a Magdalena. Yo lloré, yo lloré, yo lloré por amor a Magdalena.
Qué dolor el que siento en el alma. Ay, qué dolor, ay, qué pena.
Yo lloré, yo lloré, yo lloré por amor a Magdalena.
Nadie debe llorar como yo te lloré, mujer. Oye, tú eres traicionera.
Llora,
Porque traigo la pena
yo lloré,
en el alma.
llora,
Te digo una cosa, mujer, vas a pagar, vas a pagar.
llora, como yo lloré.
Ya no lloro más,
Llora,
echa pa' allá.
como yo lloré,
Como lloré, mi negra,
como yo lloré, como yo lloré,
dale pa'lante.
como yo lloré, como yo lloré.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are expecting our moderator, Dr. Choi Chatterjee, but until then, I am Marissa Garcia and I serve as Director of Development for the College of Natural and Social Sciences. Thank you so much for being here today. I am pleased to welcome you to Cal State LA's College of Natural and Social Sciences alumni panel for the Southern California in Environmental Perspective, Ecology, Health, and Transportation. I would like to take this opportunity to say a very, very warm, big thank you to the many hands that have made this event possible. Thank you to the Cal State LA Alumni Relations Office for your partnership, the NSS faculty for nominations of tonight's speakers, the NSS Dean's Office for their endless support, the Dean of the College of Natural and Social Sciences, and the thank you so much to our alumni panelists today, not only for today, but for your efforts all year long. Thank you. Joining us tonight is Jessica Meany, is the Executive Director of Investing in Place, a nonprofit organization committed to transportation investments that strengthen communities in Los Angeles. Investing in Place's work is focused on the implementation of policies and investments at Metro and the City of Los Angeles, focusing on equitable investments and increased access for all. Jessica graduated from Cal State LA in 2006 with her master's in sociology. Thank you so much for being here, Jessica. Also with us is Luis. Luis is a policy engagement manager at Southern California Edison, where he primarily works on advocacy strategies in support of clean energy and environmental justice efforts throughout California. Prior to SCE, Luis served as the Director of Policy and Research for Inclusive Action for the city, formerly known as LURN, L-U-R-N. At Inclusive Action, Luis led the organization's research and evaluation efforts as well as several of its collaborative engagements and advocacy campaigns. Prior to this, Luis worked on public health policy issues throughout the San Gabriel Valley as the Regional Prevention Policy Coordinator for One Day, a public health nonprofit in Pasadena. Luis earned his BA from Wesleyan University with a double major in sociology and Spanish literature. His MA is in public administration from Cal State LA and is a doctoral candidate at USC's Sol Price School of Public Policy. And finally, our most recent alum, Ugbad Farah, is a current PhD student in the biological sciences at UC San Diego. She recently graduated with her master's in environmental science from Cal State LA and graduated with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Sac State. During her time at Cal State LA, she served as the Environmental Affairs Commissioner, where she chaired the Environmental Policy Committee, EPC. Ubad is passionate about bringing the gap between scientists, policymakers, students, and the general public. She is strongly invested in addressing inequities across environmental science and working towards increasing local engagement by scientists across fields. With you tonight is also Dean of the College of Natural and Social Sciences, Pamela Scott Johnson, who would like to share some remarks with you. Dean?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. It's just terrific to have you be with us. And thank you, Marissa, for those introductions. And we look forward to Dr. Chatterjee's coming in and moderating the panel, but we know that you'll be able to be here with us in the event that she can't get back on, but I'm sure she will. So good evening, everyone. As the Dean of the College of Natural and Social Science, and on behalf of all of the faculty and staff at the college, I would like to welcome you tonight. We are so grateful for the opportunity to connect with you in this virtual setting. Tonight's theme discusses the theme for tonight's discussion truly comes from the university, and it is deeply committed to the well-being of this great city, and we have been focused on being a powerful engine of mobility. In fact, last year, Cal State LA was ranked first in upward social mobility, according to a study published in the New York Times. What does this mean exactly? Well, Cal State LA has propelled a higher percentage of students from the bottom fifth of income into the top fifth of US earners. To put it mildly, our students go on to great success after receiving their education from Cal State LA. The College of Natural and Social Sciences is the largest college in the university. We are also the most diverse in terms of the variety of departments and programs. In fact, I like to think of us as a little United Nations. The college includes departments in benchtop and physical sciences like physics, behavioral sciences like psychology and sociology, and political science, from where our panelists hail from, and our humanistic endeavors like activities in our ethnic studies departments and our history departments. And in fact, our ethnic studies departments have gone on to form their own college, and certainly look on the website for that. This puts us in the unique position to answer global issues that need basic science and multidisciplinary approaches to 21st century issues. We have a total of 12 departments that serve nearly 6,000 students and over 500 graduate students. Through our programs, we hope to inspire in all an appreciation for the biological, physical, historical, and social aspects of our Earth, and a lifelong commitment to improving the lives of its inhabitants. The college also houses academic programs such as the Minority Opportunities in Research programs, which develop minority students who wish to pursue research careers in science, mathematics, and engineering. These programs have produced more students accepted into PhD programs than any other California State University system. The Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program will provide increased academic opportunities and financial support for students in the humanities that include social science, liberal arts, philosophy, and humanities in general, who will also go on to pursue PhD programs. To the alumni in this room, please don't let this be the last time we connect with you and you connect with us. I encourage you to get involved. We often have alumni panels who return to speak to students in their classes, in various organizations, and on our board of advisors. In addition, the Alumni Association has committees, mentoring programs, and alumni network. For more information, please contact us and we'll be happy to put you in touch. More importantly, you can find information on our website, and my colleagues are sharing those links with you in the chat box. Whatever your interest is, we have a place for you. More importantly, we are thrilled that you have joined us this evening. We look forward to our continued participation. I'm grateful and thankful to our panelists for joining us and sharing their talents. And I'm going to return the program back to Marissa, who may in fact turn it back over to Dr. Chatterjee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate that. We're still trying to get Dr. Chatterjee back on. So at this time, I would love the opportunity to have the panelists share a little bit about themselves and their current work. Jessica, do you mind starting us off?
Oh, I don't at all. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jessica Meany. I live in Echo Park, and I graduated from Cal State in 2006. Really excited to be here, and just always grateful to the opportunity to share with people how much I love Cal State LA and how much the experience was really meaningful to me. I attended Cal State to get my master's in sociology. I am someone who loves cities and loves people watching, and I love public space. And through like Cal State and the program, I was drawn more and more to so about 80% of the world lives in cities. And what do successful cities look like? What are some of the ingredients? To me, I was really drawn to social cohesion and how we all can see and be with each other and get where we need to go and things like that. And so I have been drawn to transportation for a very long time. And I did my thesis on the public space of walking, biking, and riding the bus in Los Angeles. I've relied on the bus. I moved to LA in the late 90s, and for almost 20 years, really relied on the bus as my primary way of getting around. And so I started investing in place, and Luis was one of my founding board members, so it's wonderful to be on a panel with him. In 2015, really to create a space in LA that bridged the gap between what I'll call the old boy network of transportation. So mainly white, affluent, older people in closed rooms, really, to tell you the truth, just making huge decisions that have just massive repercussions on our neighborhoods, our streets, our ability to get to work, access, things like that. And then a lot of really great groups that I was watching work at the local, neighborhood level, project by project. So Investing in Place is a small shop where we use the power of budget advocacy to ask tough questions and hold on our good days, hold elected officials accountable about how our public resources are being invested in our neighborhoods and in our communities, and who pays and who bears the burdens and things like that. So I do a lot of work at Metro and then at the City of Los Angeles. And over the past few years have really started to spend a lot of my time working with grassroots organizations and power building efforts to support a better city for everyone. So that's a little bit about me. And go Dodgers. So very excited.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, go Dodgers. Luis, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, starting with the Go Dodgers message or my cap today. This is from different series, so I got to get an updated one. So I'm Luis. Let's see. I'll start with where I started my career at Cal State LA. So I participated in the Masters of Public Administration program, which used to be the Masters of Science Public Admin program at Cal State LA. With the general sort of desire to learn more about nonprofit leadership, but it was within the program that I became more interested in policy-specific issues, or the sort of system in which policies sort of play out and shape. And that was largely due to one professor, Ellen Shao, who I think was a really wonderful resource when it comes to understanding how policies work, how they're formulated, how agendas are set, and how impactful the world of policymaking is in terms of making significant changes to society. And so right around that time, I was working in the public health sector, and I transitioned from that to help start the development of an organization called Learn, and now it's known as Inclusive Action for the City. And through that organization is where I met Jessica, and in there I played the role of doing a lot of policy work, so a lot of advocacy and a lot of stuff to set agendas when it comes to equitable policies related to economic development. There we fought hard to create a legal permit system for street vendors throughout Los Angeles. And we also were successful in decriminalizing street vending throughout California. At my time at Learn, I developed a personal interest more aligned with understanding the world of energy and the policy surrounding the development of clean energy sort of tools and resources throughout California. And so I made a transition from that to Southern California Edison to be more centered in that space of clean energy and environmental issues, and still sort of advancing my interest in policy agendas and sort of policy development. I'm kind of tying that now with my own personal research. So as in my doctoral sort of research, I'm trying to understand what are the emerging barriers when it comes to transitioning California communities to clean energy resources. It's a big issue across the world, right? It's one with many challenges, and a lot of other places start typically they start from a point where they're starting from scratch, right? So you think about developing countries and things like that, they're starting to just develop larger sort of energy infrastructure. Here in California, we already have a lot of that, but there are a lot of people who have not sort of integrated into that infrastructure. There's still people in the Central Valley, for example, that burn wood and burn like really expensive propane for their energy needs. And so it's interesting to see sort of the parallels in us thinking of ourselves as sort of a well-established sort of state and economy, and still have some of these developing sort of world issues within our state. And so now the question is, as we sort of advance our clean energy resources, which typically go to higher wealth families of higher education, and typically white males, we have to think about how to bring these people along in an equitable way, so that as we progress, they're not an afterthought as they have been in other transitions, but more so at the front and center of these benefits.
Thank you for that. Udbar, would you like to share, please?
Yeah, sure thing. Let me go ahead and share my screen. so I have this mini presentation prepared. So I just want to say, hey everyone, thanks for having me tonight, and for Dr. Deshaza for nominating me to be part of this really incredible panel. Yeah, so my name's Ugbad, my pronouns are she, her, and as Marissa mentioned, I'm a CSU alum through and through, and I'm currently a PhD student in the section of Ecology, Behavior, and Evolution at UC San Diego in the Shuren Lab. And so one concept of particular interest to me is looking at and studying the importance of evolutionary principles in the principles in real life applications. And so I'll explain what I mean by that in a little bit. And so I just wanted to show, let's say, a few photos where, you know, just of what I've been doing for the past few years. And so I started getting into research back in 2016. And so I just want to share a few photos. So here is me doing some STEM youth outreach group with our class at Cal State LA. And then this is us doing more sharing research to the local public, to the area where research was done. Here is me collecting samples for my master's thesis, which I recently graduated with in spring 2020. And this is me doing my first poster presentation at a national conference in 2017. And so, yeah, so that's just a little bit more about me. And so just directly jumping into the research that I'm currently interested in is this idea of using eco-evolutionary dynamics. And so it's long been assumed that ecology and evolution occur at these different timescales. So ecology deals with the relations of organisms with one another and their physical surroundings, whereas evolution is looking at their the gene distribution changes over time. And so these two are only thought to overlap. However, within the past few decades, there has been a fundamental shift in the way biologists view this and these relationships. And it was initially thought that individuals really essentially stay the same over a few generations. However, we've begun to appreciate that evolution can actually happen pretty quickly, and that these predator, prey, host, parasites, competitors, they can all adapt to each other pretty quickly in just a couple of generations. And so that has affected things like population cycles, as well as the spread of epidemics. And so this question comes into mind where I am thinking of how can we apply evolutionary principles such as trait variation to these practical problem solving in biotechnology to address these key sustainability issues. And so one of the most widely discussed issues nowadays is non-renewable energy and renewable energy. And so fossil energy was actually produced by ancient algae in plants. And of course, fossil fuel is not a renewable resource, and depending on it is not realistic. We don't have a million years to just waiting around to have more fossil fuel around. And so the question comes to mind, so what are our options instead? What can we focus on? And so our areas of focus become sustainability, affordability, and abundance. And one thing comes to mind, and that is algae. And so, like I said, fossil fuels were produced by ancient algae, and within the past few decades, there have been attempts to use algae as a source of fuel, so biofuel. And algae is actually pretty great for several reasons. And so algal biofuel is a renewable resource. It is environmentally friendly. It is sustainable. It is abundant, and it's algae cultivation is algae biofuel is pretty captivating because it is in abundance and it can be cultivated. And so over here are these raceway ponds, and so this is just algae cultivation at a large scale. And so questions arise: how can we use ecological and evolutionary principles to design product and resilient systems, and how can we achieve this goal that we have without negatively impacting the global climate and environment? And so we have to think of doing this in sustainable, scalable solutions, right? And so I hope to investigate, evolutionary traits of algae guided by the principles such as trait evolution. And so one of our major goals is to reduce our dependence on oil which would provide environmental benefits and, of course, economic opportunities across the nation and the globe. And so when it comes to connecting my research to policy, sometimes it can feel a little bit of a long shot. However, I really like looking at this figure where it shows a feedback loop between ecology and policy. And so I see myself over here where I'm conducting research and also presenting my work. But as I continued to do more research and present my work at several conferences, I started to notice that there's a lack of underrepresented minority students in these areas, so in the research area and education and dissemination. And so my main focus with engaging with sustainability issues, in addition to the research I was doing, was engaging with students. And so, of course, the students within the CSE system as I was there. And so I really like using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a benchmark. And you can get specific with what is personally important to you. And I think it was quite fitting that the dean also mentioned how Cal State LA is like a mini United Nations. I did not know she was going to say that before I put this slide there. So this is where it comes in handy, where you have diverse teams and a diverse a group that you work with. So if we all share the exact same values and outlooks, then we wouldn't be addressing all these different key issues. And so thinking back to the feedback loop and going to this education and dissemination area, I thought, well, how can we increase the diversity of the groups involved in education and dissemination of information, whether that be looking at ecology and environmental science or justice, looking at the health of the ecosystem, and shifting to renewable resources to addressing social equity. And so, so there's this question that comes to mind where, why should we focus on students, right? How do they actually contribute to sustainability? And from personal experience, so student-run organizations and clubs on campus, students actually don't get paid to do this work. And a lot of them are balancing their classes, jobs. Some of them have multiple jobs, balancing their mental and physical health. And on top of all of this, they still find the time and effort and energy to address these key issues, including the impacts of climate change, environmental justice, biodiversity loss, and food insecurities. And so thinking of the CSU system, it is the nation's largest four-year public university system. And out of the 23 campuses, 12 of those are within Southern California. And approximately 62% of the students in Southern California make up the entirety of the rest of the CSU system. And so it became pretty personal to me. And I thought, how could I use my position as a budding scientist, right, to address the issues that I previously talked about? And I have a few clubs and programs and organizations and committees and all of that I've been a part of. And across every single program and project, what's been really consistent is that people genuinely want to see change, and they have long wanted change, right? And so these were the outlets and resources that help them to do so. And I think it's really important to engage students in that aspect, because they're there and they just need that extra push. And so this is something I hope to do, not during my time just now as a student, but of course in the future as well for the rest of my career. And so with that, I will end this mini presentation, share some of my sources, and thank everyone involved who helped me to get to where I am today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ubak. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, Dr. Choi Chatterjee won't be able to join us this evening. It sounds like the internet in her block is all completely out. So you're stuck with me. That's okay. But what Dr. Chatterjee did do beforehand is she actually developed tonight's question. So I'm going to start with Jessica. I have a question for you that was formulated by Dr. Chatterjee. So when you live car-free in Los Angeles, you really make this powerful statement against the auto industry and the fossil fuel industry. How can changes in our personal behavior have a positive impact on the environment?
Well, they certainly can. And I think, so yeah, for about, 1997 till last year, I lived without a car. But I share that with some caveats that are very important. I don't have children. My parents don't live nearby, so I'm not caring for anyone who's aging. I have always been lucky enough to live within 3 miles of where I work, and I have a rather simple life. But I got married, I don't know, a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And with that, my responsibilities and my family expanded. My husband's mother can't drive, his brother can't drive. And my husband works all over the county. So we got a car. But I think for me, I chose not to drive because I just don't like it. I've been in a couple bad car accidents. I just never felt safe. I'm not somebody who loves to drive. And also, when I was a teenager, I was one of those kids reading all this climate change stuff and freaking out. And so I'm an environmentalist. I also just love the freedom of buses and walking and biking. I used to love that, having my own Metro Pass meant I could go anywhere. But so I think, and also, as we talk about the environment, the largest impact of greenhouse gas emissions is from our transportation sector. But over the past 10 or 15 years of working on transportation issues in LA, I'd be remiss if I romanticized transit in LA. The amount of jobs you can reach in LA County with a car versus transit is astronomical. Cars are a key to economic success for many of us in Los Angeles County. But I think one of the things that really led me down my professional path is my choice to live without a car for so many years, and how horrible the conditions I saw for people who didn't have access to a car, and who was riding it and how it was experienced. And then it was amplified when I took a government job after my time at Cal State, working as a transportation planner. And they really glorified transit. We're like, it's great, it's great. And it seemed like it was for everyone else, the buses were great, but if you were actually riding it and experiencing it, it was a whole other thing. So I think not only did my personal choice, I hope, reduce my carbon footprint, but it's deeply informed some of the work, how I do it, and what motivates me in some of my own personal experiences. So I'll try that answer, Marissa.
I like it. Thank you so much. So I wanted to just pause for a second and remind our audience that if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Thank you. So Luis, the next question is for you. How can public utility companies such as SCE reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases and become an advocate for better air quality in Southern California?
Yeah. So that's a bit of a tricky question, only because not all utilities are built the same. So when you think about utilities, right, there are a bunch of different sort of levels to consider. There are investor-owned utilities, which are the big three and IOUs in the state of California, such as SCE, right, and those are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. And then you have also public utilities like LADWP, which are governed by a board of commissioners at the city level, and also are regulated or mandated by city officials and stuff like that. So those are municipal public utilities. So I say it's a tricky question because it depends on the role depends on what the utility has invested in, right? So, or where their assets lie. For example, you have a utility like Southern California Gas, right, which is one of the major sort of the only gas provider for a large portion of California. All of their assets and all of their resources, how they literally make money is through the investments and infrastructure they make into gas pipes, right? So that's how they're getting a return on the investment that they make. You can't really clean that up unless you completely transform the way you're capturing sort of gas, or how you're becoming really innovative in terms of how you're altering the fuel source itself. And they're trying to come up with like really good ways of sort of becoming innovative and capturing gas so that it's a more environmental friendly thing. Ultimately though, you're still burning a fossil fuel. So when you think so, and then there are other utilities, the other two sort of major utilities also in the state of California, which is PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric. Half of their assets, half of each of the utilities assets are also based on fossil fuel technologies. So when you compare that to Southern California Edison, it's a little easier for Southern California Edison to pivot into a sort of clean energy orientation, because Edison doesn't have any infrastructure on that is based on fossil fuels. So really, SCE is in charge of the power lines for distribution and transmission of energy, of electricity. And where they get that electricity from, they get to choose, right? So they can choose cleaner alternatives than some of the other utilities. So SCE has done a lot in that regard. So they procure a lot more clean energy from a bunch of different sort of vendors throughout the state. And they can do that because they have the flexibility, because the infrastructure is really in that transmission of electricity. So what does that mean? I think it's, when it comes to like, when we think about the future and what that means, it means a couple of different things. It means that there needs to be a lot of planning and thinking about how these sort of investments that already exist in fossil fuels are decommissioned and are pulled out of our energy infrastructure entirely, right? If we're serious about getting to 100%, if we're serious about getting to all of our energy goals and all of our emissions goals, we need to start thinking about how we're going to divest from fossil fuel sort of resources, and how we're going to decommission all those assets that are already there and transform them into something else. Also, from a regulatory perspective, we need to think about how we're going to have people not be on the hook for paying into those systems anymore. Because as you get people off of these fossil fuel technologies, so for example, like a lot of wealthier homes, right, in California can already start to put the investments personally into their homes to sort of become less dependent on the grid. So they can switch quickly to sort of solar panels, they can switch to electric vehicles, they can switch to all the things that'll make them cleaner, more environmentally friendly. But what does that mean? It means that you have a lot of people who can't make that transition as quickly, left on that system that is now becoming outdated and still dirty and still polluting the environment. And as you leave fewer and fewer people on a system such as those like gas assets, it becomes disproportionately expensive to maintain those assets. So you suddenly have this weird sort of like flip where you have, as is the trend has been in a lot of sort of energy resources, you have a lot of wealthy people switching over to cleaner technologies, and they're paying a lot less for their energy now. And you have a lot of low-income people, which are, Black and brown communities in California historically, now tied to a system because of the regulatory compact that exists between the state and the investor-owned utility. So you'll have a ton of people, you'll have a ton of poor people essentially paying for gas systems that are no longer useful and are going to further hurt the environment. So that's like the big sort of future sort of picture in terms of thinking about what utilities need to do. So there's a technological component, right? It's thinking about how to create cleaner fuels and use the existing assets that are already there in terms of infrastructure. But it also means rethinking that regulatory structure that ties people to specific systems, right? So as you start to decommission these assets, these gas-based and fossil fuel assets, you need to think about how you're going to get people that are low income and that are disproportionately impacted by some of these sort of environmental hazards, how to get them off that system first. That way they're not tied to these assets in the future and then paying a whole lot more for energy that's not as clean. It's complicated. It's weird.
Very.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. Upad, I have a question for you. In thinking about your time at Cal State LA, can you tell me, as an ASI environmental commissioner, what was your biggest accomplishment and what that made our campus more sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that it wasn't just my accomplishment, as commissioner. It was really important for me to, work with my committee members as well. And we delegated responsibilities, but we also made sure that if anyone couldn't work on something, that we'd be available to step in for them and help them until, they were able to at the next point. And so I definitely could not do this on my own, but I will say that something we worked really hard on to make sure that was passed was we updated the ASI internal sustainability guidelines. That was their policy 19, and it hadn't been updated for over 7 years. And so that was something we decided to tackle right on. And with biweekly meetings, it was a bit difficult having to make sure it was timely. So I definitely learned how policy can sometimes take a little longer than expected. But in addition to that, we also did, I think, a really great job of educating the public and our students. And we worked with our sustainability manager and the committee at Cal State LA. And so we were able to increase membership to what it was several years ago. We did a lot of events, and those events were not just to have flyers around and post on social media, but they served a greater purpose, to make sure that our students were well aware that their efforts towards sustainability were not futile, that there were also a lot of work being done by staff and facilities to also go together with what we were doing already. And so one of the things we did was the coastal cleanups. We worked with Heal the Bay as well, and we connected with people from the greater Los Angeles area, and we wanted to focus on our local community as well. And so one thing I really enjoyed doing was our habitat restoration events, and we collaborated with the Audubon Center at Debs Park, and in addition to like a ton of other things that I'm really proud that our committee did. So those are just a few highlights. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I know that our students are so engaged on campus, so I'm just glad to see that engagement continue and having you come back and share that experience. So the next question actually I have, I'm going to go back to Jessica. Can you tell me, how can Los Angeles upgrade its public transportation systems, especially the bus services, to help low-income communities? I think you may have touched on that a little bit, but I'd love to hear more.
I think we need to build power and really amplify the experiences of people who are currently using our buses and have for a long time, and hold our Metro board accountable. There's a real lack of that in LA, and a very big disconnect in my work of what policymakers are doing and the people they are serving. I think one of the reasons I'm very drawn to budget advocacy and work at the county and city level is we right here in Los Angeles County generate about 70% of all of our public funding that goes for our highways, our sidewalks, our bike lanes, our buses. Everything in transportation is within Los Angeles County for transportation sales taxes. So we can be grumpy at Sacramento or DC or the federal government, but actually our Metro board directly controls about 70% of their pre-COVID $7 billion annual budget. And so that 13 members is incredibly powerful. And many people think of Metro as a bus and train place, which is understandable, but actually they're a transportation commission. They are handling, they're funding the building for the 405, for our freeways, for our express lanes. But we have a lot of really great policies in Los Angeles County, but we don't have as power, and we don't have power based in Black, Brown, API communities to really question our public spaces. And I think with COVID, that's come up even more intensely. LA is a city with the least amount of transit ridership loss across the country. So what that means is people who rely on our buses today have no other choice. It's literally a lifeline. And then of course, with public safety and Black Lives Matter and whose safety is getting prioritized, I think it's time for a real reckoning about where our public dollars are going and for whose benefits. But I think the way I want to be a part of getting there is more power building and more like interdisciplinary efforts. I think that makes me hopeful. And expanding our Metro board, they need some bus riders on it. It's a very small board, and they're not voted. They get appointed, so they never have to run and say like, hey, these are my views on transportation. They just get appointed, and then there's a real disconnect in accountability for what communities need.
I did not know that. Thank you so much for sharing. So the next question I have is, I'm going to go back to Luis. Should the health of the environment be considered as an important factor when we create public health policies?
Absolutely not. No, I'm kidding. They absolutely should. I think a lot of the time there. So I'll speak a little more broadly on that. I think when there's this, when we think about there's a lot of these things are so intertwined, right? When we think about clean energy, public health, when we think about the economy, there's this I don't know, there's this myth that these things need to fight against each other when we're developing sort of policies and regulations, right? Like when you think about like even like jobs in the economy, people are always like, well, either we're gonna have uh, you know, good working transportation or vehicles or something, or we're gonna have jobs or something like that, right? Or if we're gonna make these investments in clean energy, we're gonna lose all of these jobs that are associated with fossil fuels. And that's a false that narrative doesn't exist, right? Like it really doesn't. Like there's nothing necessarily indicating that if you implement a lot of clean energy and environmental friendly policies that ultimately also support healthier environments, that you're going to suddenly lose all of these sort of great things that you have in place at the moment. In fact, the opposite is probably true. And California, I think, is like the perfect example of a lot of this, right? California has been a leader in sort of clean energy and sort of environmental policies since like the 1930s or 1940s, back when like acrid haze was like suddenly like invading different communities and people couldn't see more than like 10 feet ahead of them, when they finally realized that the problem was smog from vehicles, right, from internal combustion engines. And so since then, California has always like has pushed the envelope, right? Like they've asked for vouchers, or not vouchers, they've asked for what's it called? Lost the word for a second. But they've always sort of appealed to sort of go to reach a little higher than the national standards for like emissions and things like that. And so they've asked for waivers. There we go. So when like a certain emissions like standard was set across the United States or federally, California would always apply for a waiver to exceed whatever the federal standard was for vehicle emissions, for example. And then also like set like major policy goals like AB 32 and all of these sort of clean energy targets to reduce emissions levels to like previous years, have all like demonstrated that California is still like advancing. It's still one of the largest economies in the world. It's still doing everything like in a way that a lot of economists are constantly saying like that's not going to work. If you impose too many regulations and you transition too quickly to clean energy, you're going to lose all sorts of jobs and it's going to be a mess. And that's not the case, right? I will say that what we do need to pay attention to is more so the growing inequality that exists as a result of those policies, right? So California, yes, is succeeding in sort of advancing all of these clean energy technologies and environmental policies. And it's doing well in terms of its overall macro economy and regulation. But where it's not doing well is the growing income inequality that is also tied to these implemented policies and regulations. And so that's, I think, one of the bigger issues here. And that's also a public health issue, right? Because people that don't have the resources to sort of hold themselves up, along with diminishing sort of safety nets, results in a lot of big public health issues. And we can't ultimately advance a lot of the regulations and clean energy sort of technologies that we would like to anyway, if we don't have everyone on board. So what do we do in that case? I mean, you have to recenter how you prioritize these sort of achievements, right? You have to prioritize some communities more than others when you're making these transitions. And that's not very hard, right? Like that's not that difficult. If you see that some communities are unable to have, like if they don't have the capital to sort of invest immediately in sort of changing something in their homes, like weatherization, like we're just becoming more efficient, or they don't have like the actual tools or resources, like solar panels, energy storage, whatever. Like the easiest thing and the cheapest thing to do in a lot of these cases is to just give it to them. Kind of like housing and homelessness. Like really the easiest thing is to just give someone housing, right? It's the same thing here. Like from an economic perspective, if you're gonna mince that, right? If you're gonna go into like this pure economic argument, it's easier and it's more efficient, and because you're no longer dealing with the administrative costs of implementing a highly regulated program, to just give someone the resources and get out of the way, right? Um, so I wish there was more focus and attention on that, and less of a focus and attention on sort of these patriarchal sort of systems and policies and procedures that often overregulate and demand so much of people when they include them in programs, right? Because really it's like, it's like you don't want to give something away for free. Nothing is free anyway. Just give it away. Like it's so annoying, right? Like even like now in energy, and I'm hoping to push for against a lot of this stuff, is a lot of these sort of clean energy programs, they ask for a family's income, they ask for sort of proof of like how much they were paying for their energy bills for over like 6 months. They ask for all this documentation, and for what? Like to verify that they're not going to cheat the system in some kind of way? Like it's not that much money. Like just give them the resources so everyone benefits, right? If we're already arguing that the more of these resources that are on the grid will help improve reliability across the board, just maximize how many people have access to it. So I think it's a lot more of that than necessarily like, how are we going to balance the economy and clean energy? That's fake. That's a complete myth.
I like that. Thank you so much. So last uh, question that I have for Ubad, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. What are some of the immediate policy implications on your current research in ecology?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I guess rather than immediate, I would say that the implications are direct. There's techno-economic modeling and analyses that are done to address these interdependent issues regarding algal biofuel. And so when you consider the biomass production, biofuel production, how it ties in with, for example, energy and fuel economics and energy, water, environment axes, that I would say it has those direct implications to there, but it would probably take some time and to reach that point. And so because I'm quite early in my research, what I do hope to do in this area, or I guess the broader field in this area, is to contribute to the policy that informs these decision makers, these policy makers, getting into those rooms where this is made, using the principles that I was talking about beforehand, and these longstanding concepts in ecology and evolution. And so just thinking back to the feedback loop figure that I showed, it's really important, to educate the public and emphasizing issues regarding non-renewable energy, how we're depleting our resources, but also I think the onus is, it's really important not to put that at the individual level. There are a lot of corporations that that are really at fault for this, and so I think it's really important not to make it, blame individuals, especially people in these lower income neighborhoods. And I think that's really important to note. When we talk about, we're depleting our resources, we're running out of everything at hand, and how there are issues regarding food security. And so algae can actually be used as food security. It's already a food source in many areas in the world. And, just letting people know that this is a possibility, and it has been for hundreds of years. And so I like to think our world is not all doom and gloom. And I think this panel is evident of that, and really driving that home. So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. It's so great to have you guys all on here. And I actually want to encourage our panelists, because as you refer to each other, I welcome you to ask questions of each other. I do have a couple of questions that have come in beforehand and in the Q&A. And anybody can feel free to jump in too. So the first is, how has biotechnology contributed to overcoming sustainability issues?
I think that one's you, Bud. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know
sure.
that.
I'll jump in. Yeah. So, in addition to the renewable energy that I talked about, one of the other most discussed topics today is the issue surrounding food security. And so, I would say biotech has contributed to growth within the agricultural sector at a global scale, really, in assisting with food security. And so, compared to your average crop, I mentioned earlier that algae has rapid growth rates. And so, it can be actually grown in areas where foods cannot, in these harsher conditions. And so, in addition to renewable energy, there's food security. And so, when it comes to biofuel, the amount of land needed to produce a given amount of energy for algae compared to soybeans or crops, it's such a small fraction. So you need way, way, way less land. So it almost seems like a no-brainer that we would just opt for that. But of course, there are issues with reducing operating costs and talking to the public, and then again, profits for that. And so a lot of, I would say, these corporations are profit driven. And so if their main concern is not really if they're losing money, I'd say, I don't know if that's something they'd be interested in, even if it is helping people at a global scale. So yeah, biotech has attributed and contributed to these different areas, but there are still a lot of issues that we need to address before I think we get to the point where it's available to all.
Awesome, thank you. I did have a question beforehand from somebody who submitted, and anyone feel free to jump in. Given our current political climate, what environmental issues would you like to see addressed in the near future, if you had your pick?
Housing. I'm really concerned about housing and people who don't have it in LA. I mean, when we think about how all these things interact, and really like some of the root of it is that is poverty and the lack of access to impacting and like creating a city that it works for everyone. But I don't know if anyone was watching today at LA City Council, they were considering a motion to make it illegal to be living on a sidewalk if you were in an area that had recently gotten like a homeless service in the last 2 years, like just the criminalization of public space, yet just an incredible shortage of housing, and also in a city that is being racked by an FBI probe on pay to play. Like our land use issues, our housing, who our public space stuff is just having rippling effects into everything. And I think that really worries. I think that's a huge issue. But I don't know. Luis, what do you guys think?
Yeah, housing is huge for sure. I think even thinking about the other sort of bigger issue, and when you think about like emissions and stuff like that in the state, most are coming from vehicles, right? Not so the sort of the emissions that are being generated from like the development of energy, that's sort of declining. But the other sort of side of that is the residential space also. That's a big source of GHGs in the state of California, or everywhere really. And so you can't solve that without like a stable sort of housing system, or like stable housing across California. And that so many of the difficulties that come with implementing a lot of these sort of initiatives that target housing or environmental policies when it comes specifically to housing, or energy policies when it comes specifically to housing, is the dynamic of like the owner, like who owns property and who doesn't. And so you can't do much to a property if you don't have control over over said property, right? So you can't automatically enroll in a lot of programs or resources that are currently available because you might not have the okay to upgrade a panel. You might not have the okay to install whatever it is that a landlord may not want you to. Equally, like you can also have access to a lot of the economic sort of benefits of some of these technologies if you don't own like your housing situation. So there's a lot of like ways to work around that. There's, you know, community solar programs and things like that that are designed to sort of level the playing field, so to speak, in terms of, you know, non-property owners getting some of these benefits. But ultimately, like when you make it a cost sort of, when a decision is based on costs, you're going with the cheapest thing possible, and you're going with the cheapest sort of technologies and fuels available, which are usually the dirtiest and the most polluting in the residential space. So I don't know, like how do you fix that? Is it more rights for renters? Like is it figuring out how to increase, you know, property ownership for some of these communities that are you know, like constantly trapped in cycles of poverty? That's it's complicated, but you know, thinking about housing, it's you know, just yeah, I'm framing it through that because that's what Jessica brought up first. But that's a huge area to tackle as well. Thinking about like energy and emissions, it's the residential space. So there's a lot to figure out there for sure.
Upa, did you have a response for that?
Yeah, sure. I would definitely echo housing as well. You know, I think it's a human right to have housing. I don't think you need to work a certain number of hours or pay like a certain amount of taxes to be deserving of shelter, right? And good shelter that can provide privacy and basic needs for that. But another issue is I would say fracking. I didn't think it was a controversial issue for people who campaign to address climate change to be okay with fracking, you know, and fracking is drilling down, you know, into the earth with high pressure water and releasing gas inside. And so it can poison groundwater, which a lot of rural communities rely on. And methane, I believe there's this one article where it showed that methane seeping into the water source of some people. And that's really dangerous. And of course that threatens wildlife and changes landscapes as we know it. And of course, that ties into people losing their land and their homes, right? So everything is really connected. This isn't happening in vacuums or silos. So I think honestly, you can relate nearly every issue back to itself. So it's just this huge network, essentially.
Yeah, I will also add that like thinking about that safe sort of thinking about shelter and safety for people, like a lot of what we think about in terms of like safe shelter, that's also going to change in the next couple of years, right? When we think about how the climate is already changing. So, you know, as certain parts of California face extreme instances of heat, or more places become flooded, and just you have this crazy sort of variety of sort of weather conditions, that sort of the availability of safe housing and safe shelter is gonna decrease, right? And so that's another sort of that's another like kind of bubble that's gonna burst, I think, at some point soon, especially as you have, you know, back when like wealthier families like were moving out of like the inner city when it was like white flight and all that sort of stuff, and populating more like suburban areas that are now like wildland urban interface areas that are facing like high fire risk. um, it's probable that you'll see them sort of migrate to areas that are safer, that are cooler, right, that are not as they're not as exposed to potential fire and other sort of catastrophic events. And so what does that mean? That means poor people get displaced, you know. And so like that, so it's not even like the diminishing number of resources or like housing assets that's going to be an issue. It's more so people fighting for whatever is now considered safe and like a good investment. And so that sort of resilience sort of lens is one that we have to start thinking about when it comes to how money is going to flow into different parts of California.
I wanted to segue because we've talked a lot about different issues, and I think even Jessica mentioned before how we're going to solve these problems as being interdisciplinary. So I'm going to answer one of the questions in the Q&A box from Dr. Ellis. He asked, what role does an institution such as Cal State LA play in helping solve problems at the intersection of environment, health, and transportation? And I want that, and I bring that up too, because I know that there's also students on the call. So I think it's important for them to hear that, any thoughts that you have about that.
I can start. I think the accessibility of education is huge, right? One, I think that's one of the experiences that I really appreciated when it came to my experience at Cal State LA. Cal State LA, I will say, is still by far my favorite educational experience, period. Like, I went to, so where I went for undergrad was like what is considered like a prestigious, like small liberal arts school and in like northeastern United States. And my experience sucked, right? Like initially it was awful. Like I didn't feel poor until I went to that school because I grew up in Bell Gardens and everyone else had the same was on the same playing field, right? We were all poor. We didn't realize that other people had more. It wasn't until I went there that I started to sort of experience all these sort of like things, right? Like I saw really wealthy families. I saw how underprepared I was in sort of my high school and all of my previous sort of education in comparison to a lot of these people that had a lot more resources to throw at, like a lot of these families that had resources to throw at their kids and have them be better prepared for their experience in college. So that sucked. But Cal State LA was like great because all of the readings, all of the things that I learned in my MPA program are the exact same sort of readings and things that you learn in any other MPA program, right? So there is no like alternative set of literature that you're receiving at USC versus what you receive at Cal State LA. You're still reading Herbert Simon. You're still reading all these theorists that are like the standard across the board for any sort of advanced degree. And it was affordable, right? Like I came out with zero debt from my MBA program. I was able to pay that thing like per month and it was fine, right? Wesleyan is not affordable. USC is expensive, right? And so I think just that alone, just being a very accessible, like good education is such a big deal. And it's something that like whenever people are asking me for recommendations in terms of grad school, like heck yeah, I direct them to Cal State LA because really like so much of your success depends on how hard you work, to the relationships you build, right? And so if you need, like, you got to put in the work, but you also have to like build your own network and do all that sort of stuff. USC might have like a network of people, but you still got to do the work of tapping into it. But if you do it on your own, you can get it and it's amazing, right? And you have people like Jessica who are connected to everyone, right? And so it's a good experience. Like still by far my favorite experience. I think that alone is like kick ass and should be sort of applauded, is just the accessibility of education, because that's how you get to solving problems.
I just wanted to jump in real quick and say that I can't tell you how many people are agreeing with you in the chat, Luis. Thank you for that Cal State LA plug.
Yeah, Luis, you're on fire tonight. It's so good to listen to you. I mean, when the dean opened up with like that stat about how upward mobility or people who graduate from Cal State LA go on to have stable income, and that is, whenever I hear that in the news, I'm like, yes. And I think I want to just echo what Luis says. Like, I was working full time. I was able. I think I graduated with a master's with 5,000 of debt, but like that enabled me to take risks in my job. And I work in the nonprofit advocacy sector, and so I wasn't. And then I can follow my little social justice warrior spirit. Like I think I wasn't saddled with huge debt, and was able to do it. And I think I did it in 3 years. And then also like I rode that bus only lane. Like it was accessible to me. I mean, the one other thing though, I think Cal State could be doing is I love the Pat Brown Institute. They do a lot of work in Southeast LA and are really pushing cool ideas and cool connections. But like, can Cal State LA be pushing stuff like universal basic income or other ideas of like also parallel to accessible education that really tracks well for people to be accepted and to find their people. And I mean, I agree with you, Luis. Cal State was my favorite experience of like learning about urban sociology on the campus of Cal State LA with the students that I was meeting and networking. And it wasn't just these theoretical ideas, it was like real life about race, class, gender. And my friends I made there are my best friends 15 years later. So, but I think Cal State LA should flex a little bit more in LA because of all of the amazing alumni and also like really providing like access to education, to networks, to new places in the ways that like USC can't hold a candle to. I'm really proud to be part of that community. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely add to that. I'll also say being at Cal State LA, excuse me, it has really helped me think more critically, I would say, compared to the beginning of my program at the end, towards the end, I was able to come up with research questions that I wasn't able to do in the beginning. And I would say it's because of the rigorous training that I received at Cal State LA with professors and faculty and advisors there. And so, but also I was able to graduate also with no debt because I was on a fellowship at Cal State LA being part of the LSAT program. And so that was such a huge part of me for attending Cal State LA, and it really helped me focus on my education and research, right? And so going back to this focus on students that I talked about earlier, how students spend a lot of time in organizations and clubs without being immediately like paid for it, right? I think it'd be really helpful if there was more funding for students in that aspect, being more transparent with funding, increasing funding for areas related to sustainability and everything else, of course, So so being at Cal State and working with everyone from different backgrounds, it really opened my eyes to the wealth of knowledge and experience and networking everyone has to offer. And I think sometimes it can be a little overwhelming just because of how incredible everything is, but I think it's really important to just recognize the resources that are at Cal State LA, and so how we can contribute to already existing organizations and programs and how we can improve them and also continue to involve our students at that level, that decision-making level, yeah.
Along that vein, actually, I did get a question from Dr. Subramaniam right now, because we're addressing students a little bit. So she wants to know, what advice would you have for Cal State LA students if they wanted to pursue their passion for social justice in the area of environment and transportation?
I guess I'll start off. So I guess in the area of environment, I would say you have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable in different situations. I don't mean putting yourself in harm's way or environments that, question your identity or humanity. But 3 years ago, I could never imagine myself talking to a huge group of people, without having notes glued to my eyes and constantly scanning the room for looks, when in reality, people are just really genuinely amazed by what you're saying and the questions you're asking. Or sometimes they're just trying to stay awake. And in that case, I say, don't take it personally. But it's really important to find the issues that speak to you, what you can connect to. And if you make it personal, then, you connect to it to a deeper level, whatever that case is, and you become more passionate about that. And it doesn't become something you just put on your CV, right? It becomes this lifelong thing you pursue. And so I say, remember your voice is important. Every action you take counts. And then when you speak up and out, I can definitely assure you that there's at least one person who will leave feeling a little bit more motivated before you spoke. So yeah, that's my advice. Keep asking questions and insert yourself into rooms that don't invite you. invite yourself to those areas, I would say. So yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, I'll add to sort of that to what was just expressed, like reach out to people. People love talking about their work. People love talking about sort of what they have going on, what, because they're excited about it, right? I mean, not everyone is, but a lot of people are, right? Especially in the space of social justice and or equity or any of those sectors, like to be in those fields or to be dedicated to that specific work, like you have to be excited about it, because otherwise it's it can weigh a lot on you, right? You know, because once you get past like the numbers or the stats and you're actually you take into consideration that when you're looking at sort of poverty data and all this sort of stuff, you're thinking about people. It's really heavy, and it could get very depressing at times. um, so like the people that are in that space already are very dedicated and want more people to hear them out, in my experience. um, and so honestly, like hopefully you get our contact info. Like I'm more than happy to connect anyone that's listening right now to anyone that I know, right, that's in the field or that's interested or that may align with some of your interests. I'm sure the other panelists will do the same. Because ultimately the more people that are involved in these topics, the more success we will achieve. So yeah, make yourself a little uncomfortable, send an email. Like I promise, like 95% of the people on the end, like in that space, are very nice and will be responsive to supporting your growth.
Yeah. Deb, I second that. Louise, like just reaching out to people you admire, just taking a shot. They might not respond, maybe they will. If you do land the meeting, be prepared and actually read some of their stuff before you walk into that. That'll help. But and also, like I would say, I get emails like that sometimes from students, and CSU students are always the most prepared and like thoughtful. I work with I hired a person who's getting his master's at UCLA, but he's a CSU Fullerton. He's just so, I don't know, thoughtful. And then this consultant I work with, who's brilliant, went to Cal State. You guys should actually tap him for some of these events. He's an incredible policy thinker. He went, I think he got his kind of like yours, Luis, but I think his was more administration or something. But another thing, I think a lot of stuff is local, and I encourage you to read the LA Times and just keep up with what's happening in the news. Because in terms of public policy and all of these issues, that's where a lot of the key things are showing up. I like to read the paper, but like local news, but like LA news about like who's doing what and things like that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I know the students that are on the call still are appreciating your comments. And then feel free, I know that Luis kind of volunteered all of you to share your contact information. I'll let you guys do that in the chat. So I'll just take maybe one last question because we are getting close to time. Along those lines, maybe even addressing some of the faculty that are on the call as well. How can they help students find their voices in their communities that they come from? And maybe even some of us as staff members as well.
So what do you mean a little bit? Can you explain that a little more?
So we've talked about, encouraging them to get out there themselves. So what words of advice would you wish somebody, a faculty member gave of you? I know we have fabulous faculty, but if there's something else that we could be doing even now, and even in the state that we are now, is there something else beyond what they are doing that we can encourage students to feel heard in their communities?
I'll take a shot. I don't know, to tell you the truth, but one thing that I've been really inspired by during COVID is the mutual aid networks that are popping up. And so I think that that's also a way to get in touch with other people in your neighborhood who are civically minded and want to get involved. And I just think that some of the direct relief people need right now is a good way that potentially opens up new relationships and new energy for community organizing and things like that.
Yeah, I guess as a student, I would say go to your professor's office hours, go to office hours of professors you're not taking their classes. I would say definitely, I wish someone told me to reach out to faculty earlier than I did. I think that would have been really great. But in addition to, I guess what Jessica's saying, be prepared. I think it really shows if you're prepared or not, and get involved with your local community. There's a lot of work being done. I think it's easy for us to get lost in, global movements, which are great, but there's stuff happening right in our own backyard. So I would say make sure you get involved with your local community as well. And so, yeah, and when you reach out to people, have a ton of questions prepared. People love talking about themselves and the work that they do. So you probably won't have any issues with that. So yeah.
Yeah, did on all that.
So I'm going to allow the dean. Dean, do you have any questions or outgoing remarks before I wrap us up soon?
Yeah, sure. I've been posting my questions in the chat, and I just want to say how excited I am to not only hear the work that you're doing, but the way you continue to empower us in Los Angeles. I mean, I love the fact when we asked about environmental issues, Jessica, you said, housing. I mean, because it's an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue, and each of you, talked about the impact and the ways that we have to think about who is making policy and how policy is being made and how we think about the science and the fact that you're in those spaces, coming from the space that we attempt to provide for you at Cal State LA with the kind of grit that we have and the commitment to the community makes me really proud. And I just want to let you know from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate not only your faculty's recommendation, but your stepping up to the plate and just sharing authentically who you are. I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I look forward to the work that you will continue to do. I think if there's a question that we ask, and I think we started to ask that, there are ways in which you've really talked about how the curriculum and the faculty have really helped you as students find your voice, and you've made recommendations about how we continue to do that. What I'd like to kind of hear in a quick round, and if it's not time, I understand that because I'm sensitive to the clock, but that is, how do we mobilize our communities to take on some of these issues? I mean, each of the things that you've spoken about are personal passions, personal professional passions that you have continued to mine. What can we do as a Cal State LA community to help mobilize the broader Los Angeles community? And as you said, Ubud, that we can begin in our own backyard. Do you have any kind of quick advice for that? I'd love to hear that, and then I'll just say thank.
Yeah, so just adding on to that, I would say it's really important to, in the same vein of connecting to your local community, looking at the resource centers that are available. They already have connections to a ton of people that, maybe it would be a little more difficult for you to do individually. So I think resource centers are a great way to connect with people. And then there are already existing programs. There is some really great, so even faculty are involved. And I want to mention Dr. Ugar, who has been incredible during my time at the EPC. And so she's worked with different organizations in Los Angeles and East Los Angeles area. And I think using the resources that already exist. I think it's great that new programs pop up every now and then because there are new issues that arise, but connecting back to what's already there and the resources that are already available. So.
I'll throw out an idea of like, and maybe you guys already do this. If there's like a class that's like a community practicum and it has like speakers that are local practicing, work in City Hall or work in nonprofits that are guest lecturers, and it can be something rooted in what's going on and all the intersection of all these issues in LA, but amplifies practitioners. And that'd be cool. I'd take that class.
I was going to say, it sounds like we have another alumni panel brewing, or another way to reach out to alumni through these opportunities.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I'll add to that. I think it sounds connecting more of the alum. I mean, this was great, right? Doing more of that and infusing them into some of the existing sort of courses, I think helps a lot. The more you can ground all that stuff into like those real world experiences, I think it's helpful. You already have a lot of students that come with that real world experience, right? Which is, I think, huge, a big advantage. I thought it was wonderful that I was learning all this sort of theory and I was also practicing it while I was at Cal State LA. But it doesn't hurt to continuously just grow and connect more people. So I like that idea.
Great. Well, you can hold us to it as we look for affinity groups and ways to connect the
Absolutely.
alumni in the college and in the university. I'm going to turn it back over to Marissa, who was taking a big risk and asking me to ask a question out loud. I could keep it short on the chat, but I just want to say thank you to each of you for being here. We thank Dr. Chatterjee, who couldn't be on, but this is an area that she really loves, and we miss her. And Marissa, thank you for pitching in. And Christina, thank you. And the Alumni Office and the Alumni Association. So I just want to make a pitch for everybody staying connected, staying tuned. And if you are willing to be on a panel like this and you have a great idea, please let us know. We want to connect the current students with those who have graduated, not only to expand their network, but to expand the impact that we have on this region. Marissa?
Yes, thank you so much for that, Dean. I would be remiss in not mentioning that Dr. Choi Chatterjee is part of a larger group of faculty who just did get awarded a USDA grant to establish an edible garden on campus. So they're super excited about that and actually are breaking ground this fall. And it will be an opportunity for students to continue to do research, and they have plans to make it, accessible to our local community. So please stay tuned for information about that. But just in closing, I want to say that as we continue to learn about tonight's policies and environment and health and housing, we want to encourage everybody on the call and in our local communities that the way that you can be an agent of change is to go out and vote. If you didn't know, Cal State LA is a voting center. Make a plan, vote early, and be safe. So thank you again so much for joining, everybody. After this webinar, you will be receiving a survey. Please take a moment to fill it out and help us enhance the quality of our future programming. Thank you again to our panelists, our participants, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone. Way to go, Marissa.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
good job.
You did great.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, stay safe, everybody. Much appreciated.
Bye.
Thank you, Christina, Nene.